All right, good morning mga kapuso. Welcome to the latest edition of FYI. Over the past few months, we had the pleasure of talking to different folks, including Defense Secretary Lorenzana and Chief Justice Carpio. Today, we have the pleasure, and we're graced by no less than Prime Minister Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. It's really a pleasure to meet you, sir, finally, and welcome again to the Philippines. I'm sure you had a good time. I hope next time you'll have more time to go around. I'm sure you had a very busy schedule. Now, we don't have so much time, so I want to go straight to the meat of the discussion. Now, what we do in this interview is, one of the unusual things we do is we ask slightly about the background of our interviewees. And we know that by training, you were a medical doctor. So why would a medical doctor enter politics, and why?
Well, the thing is that I decided to get a university degree, and in this case, I was offered a scholarship to study medicine because I felt that only with a university degree would I be listened to seriously by people when I talk about politics. So actually, I was a politician first,
right, sir,
before becoming a doctor.
Right. Usually, lawyers get into this business. If I remember from the past, you said something like doctors are better positioned because they have differential diagnostics, that politics is actually more like medicine rather than law. Is this correct? I mean, do you think your medical background has helped you to be a better person in terms of your governance skills?
Well, initially I wanted to study law, but I didn't get a scholarship for that. They gave me a scholarship to study medicine. And later on I found that the way we treat patients is almost the same as the way we treat problems among people. So I find that the medical education was useful in my career as a politician.
And Tun Mahathir, of course, you had a stint as a prime minister for almost 20 years in the past, and then you came back at the age of 92, and you turned 93 also, of course, just after the elections. Why? I mean, usually people will say at that stage it's more about writing your memoirs and writing books and things like that. But you came back in a very difficult elections, and you campaigned very hard, very youthfully, and you inspired a lot of people. Why return at that age?
Well, shortly after I decided to resign from being prime minister in 2003, lots of people came to see me because they felt unhappy with my successor. They kept on asking me, please do something, please do something. Although I would like to retire and rest and things like that, but their insistence on my doing something forced me to be seriously concerned about the politics of the country.
And how do you cope with the stress and the hectic nature of your work at your age? Do you take power naps as some other leaders take? How do you do that?
Well, I have always been used to working hard. As a medical doctor in private practice, I used to work until the night. So working hard is not something unusual for me. When I was a politician also, I worked very hard. I like to manage things in detail.
Right. So you're a micromanager.
Micromanager.
And
yes.
workaholic? Can we call you as a workaholic prime minister?
Some people say that I'm a workaholic, but actually it is not work. It's something I enjoy doing. So I am used to working very hard, and I find that in politics you need to work hard.
Yes, sir. Prime Minister, I heard you have a very healthy diet, which helps you to keep a very healthy kind of vigor. Is that true? What is your kind of lifestyle advice that a lot of people are wondering about you?
Not any particular diet. What is important is that you don't overeat.
Yes.
Because if you overeat, you will become fat, and when you become fat, cannot be healthy. You put a big burden on the heart, trying to pump the blood all around this huge body of yours. So I have always tried to maintain a low diet, eat less, and try to ensure that I don't get overweight.
And this is a perfect segue because I remember Prime Minister Lee used to also say the same thing. He doesn't eat a lot, right? And he has routine exercise and among other things that kept him very healthy. Which brings me to the next question. Recently in one of your interviews, you said that during your first stint, ASEAN was a little bit more effective because you had big figures, right, strong men. You were there, the late Prime Minister Lee was there, the late President Suharto was there, President Ramos, your good friend, was there. He's the reason why we were able to set this up. President Marcos was there. Do you think that that model was more effective in ensuring ASEAN is more central and dynamic in dealing with the challenges in the region?
In those days, leaders stay in power for a longer time. So when you go to meetings with them, you don't see new faces. And they are very well acquainted with all the problems of the association. And because we know each other well, it's easy for us to discuss. Now, if you attend an ASEAN meeting, you find that new leaders are always becoming members of the ASEAN group because they have become very democratic, get elected, and changes of government take place very often. And therefore, sometimes it's difficult to achieve consistency in any policy.
Prime Minister, do you think that ASEAN is having some sort of a middle life crisis? Or because many people are saying that, ASEAN did a great job getting out of confrontasides, our disputes over Sabah and other things, and getting Vietnam in. But now it seems ASEAN is not very effective in dealing with newly emerging challenges, like in the South China Sea, for instance, when we have overlapping claims. How do you think is ASEAN responding to that, and what is the best way to move forward?
Yeah. There's no doubt that ASEAN countries should come closer together, should discuss issues more frequently and have some common stand on this. But because of the changes among ASEAN leaders, the next meeting will be attended by another person who may not know about the stand taken by the previous person. So we are less cohesive, less united in making stands on issues.
Don't you think, Prime Minister, maybe we could do something like the European Union, have kind of a regular bureaucracy that institutionalizes certain practices and policies and not rely on personalities? Or do you think the EU model is in itself a bankrupt system that is not applicable to us?
Well, as you can see, the European system has not worked as well as expected. They have introduced common currency, they have their own European Parliament, they meet regularly, but still the differences prevent them from making taking common action.
On the South China Sea, Prime Minister, what do you think is the best response? I've heard you made a lot of statements like demilitarization. Are you calling, for instance, for the U.S. to stop freedom of navigation operations? Or some people are saying, including myself, that why not us ASEAN claimant states among ourselves maybe negotiate our own code of conduct, because it seems our code of conduct negotiations with China have been going on for quite some time. What do you think is the best way to move forward? What should great powers do? What should we smaller powers do?
Well, ASEAN is a group of weak countries, very weak by comparison to the great powers. Our negotiation must take into consideration that we are not able to enforce. So we have to use diplomacy, and having a common stand is very good. But the way we do things should not be based on threats. We don't like to see battleships stationed in South China Sea.
Of any country?
Of any country, yes. And the South China Sea should remain free to navigation for all kinds of ships, but the naval vessels and all that should not be stationed here, because that makes it provocative.
Prime Minister, should we be worried with the militarization of the disputes, deployment of advanced military assets to these artificial islands? Are these things we should be worried about?
Well, I am totally against war. I don't like weapons. I don't like having weapons used to threaten anyone. And certainly I do not like fighting wars in order to solve problems between nations.
Which brings me to my next question. Prime Minister Lee used to be known as kind of the bridge between China and the West, but you were also very much observant and you dealt with China throughout the decades. I read some of your interviews last year whereby you were saying that maybe this is a different China. Are we seeing a different China from the China that we used to see in the 20th century? Is this a China that is much more assertive? Some would even say hegemonic. Is this something that we should be worried about? How should we deal with China?
The
new
world has
China?
always been afraid of China because of the size, the population size. When China was poor, people were worried about China, were afraid of China. Now that China has become rich, they also become worried for other reasons. The thing is the enormous size of China with a population of 1.4 billion, which is bigger than the combined population of Europe and America. So when we come against a very powerful object, well, we of course need to find other ways of dealing with the problem rather than just open confrontation.
Prime Minister, for a long time people have been talking about China's investments, whether it's a boon or it's a bane. And then the issue of Sri Lanka came forward. But, experts like me were saying, well, Sri Lanka is a small country. It's not applicable to bigger countries until the Malaysian situation happened. Our GDP size is almost the same. We're both mid-sized countries. So when you pushed back against the Chinese investments, we took notice. What do you think should be the best approach in terms of dealing with Chinese investments? Should we welcome them? And if yes, under what conditions?
We have a very definite definition of what constitutes foreign direct investment. We don't mind them setting up plants to produce goods, etc. But when it comes to developing whole towns and cities and probably bringing their people to live there, that may have a very bad political effect on the country. And then, of course, when we do on our own, we borrow huge sums of money. If you cannot pay money, you become under the influence or the direction of the lender. See, in all cases, even for individuals, if you cannot pay your debt, you find yourself very subservient to the lender. So it is better for us to grow within our means. If we have the capacity to borrow, it must be because we can repay. But when you borrow money which you cannot repay, you are endangering your own freedom.
Prime Minister, you had a very interesting visit to Beijing, where you made it very clear that we have to be careful with new imperialism and all. What was the reception of China? You think China is making adjustments also? Because many people are talking about Belt and Road Initiative 2.0, that China may have learned from the backlash against the earlier types of investments, and now they're adjusting and making sure that they take into consideration the sovereign prerogative and needs of countries. You think China now is willing to make more quality investments, inclusive investments in Malaysia and countries around the region?
Well, it is important for China to take notice of other views, other perceptions. So when we talk about new colonialism as enunciated by President Sukarno, what the Chinese are doing is not exactly that, but it has the effect of diminishing the freedom of action of the countries that are owing to too much money from China.
And perhaps this takes me to the other elephant in the room, which is the United States of America under a very entertaining and feisty leader, President Donald Trump. President Donald Trump, of course, has kind of reset the deck, right? He has transferred the American embassy to Jerusalem, which is a big issue among Muslim countries and Muslim community. And you are actually quite praised as not only a Malaysian Asian leader, but a leader among the Muslim community, all the way in the Middle East. A lot of people look up to you. What is the Malaysian stance on this? Do you think that the Trump administration is actually making the problems in the Middle East worse through these kinds of decisions? And what is the Malaysian stance on that?
I mean, Trump is unusually aggressive and inconsistent. We do not really know what he is going to do next. He may change his mind sometimes 3 times a day, as in the case of meeting with the North Korean president. So when you are uncertain about things, you have a feeling of fear. That is the problem that we see now. And the thing is that he tends to resort to unconventional reactions to
Challenges,
problems.
yeah.
Normally, the United States is supposed to set the standards for freedom, for the rights of small nations, etc. But he is talking only about America. He doesn't care about the rest of the world. But the rest of the world is very important to America. You can't just ignore it. So with this idea like having a trade war with China,
Right.
it's a very negative way of solving problem. There is a problem, we admit that. But going for a trade war which affects the whole world is not the way to tackle matters like that.
Prime Minister, are you worried about a new Cold War? Are we already in a new Cold War? Because many people are saying that the trade war is actually just a preface of something more dangerous, something more frightening. And it seems that trade war will never be solved because the United States is asking nothing less than China changing its trade and industrial policy.
Well, I won't say that there is now a Cold War, but it is working towards the possibility of a Cold War unless we take some actions to terminate this idea of trade wars.
Right.
But of course, the President of the United States must face election,
Right.
and whether he wins or not is very crucial towards the solution of this problem.
Dr. Mahathir, what can smaller size, mid-sized countries like Philippines and Malaysia do amid this kind of giant rivalry? Do we have agency? Do we have a room for maneuver? How should we deal with this challenge?
Well, obviously, confrontation, military action is not to be considered at all. We need to use diplomatic action. We need to negotiate things, to arbitrate. That's the way we need to approach, and we have to accept that we are weak, and weak people have certain openings for them to resolve their problem. Also, we need to identify what we can use that is within our means.
Prime Minister, there's a lot of discussion about so-called Indo-Pacific, no more Asia-Pacific. How do you see that? Because our Indonesian friends are saying this is a kind of an American containment strategy, and that maybe we in the ASEAN have to have our own definition of Indo-Pacific, which is more inclusive. What is your stance? What is the Malaysian stance on the Indo-Pacific issue?
No, America is very fond of using threats, the threat of military action, sanctions, and things like that. That's the way America, especially under Trump, behaves, and that is not conducive to establishing good relations between countries. We always have problems with other countries, with neighbors in particular, but there are ways and means of settling those things without threats.
Right.
America seems to flex its muscle every time there is something that America doesn't like. And people do not like that because they feel very uncomfortable doing things with talking to America.
So it's like every problem is like a nail to the hammer of their military strength in that sense. What do you think about this whole Kim-Trump summit? Don't you think that this is where maybe unconventional politics is much more effective to reset the deck and create new space for cooperation?
Yeah, there was a time where we couldn't imagine the president of North Korea meeting Trump.
Yes.
And they were firing missiles every now and then, and they were showing their military strength.
Right.
And yet, this man decided that he will talk to Trump. He will discuss with Trump. And he has done so twice. I think we should recognize that he has made a very radical change in the way he conducts his foreign policy. And this should be appreciated by us to the extent that they have complied. We should do something to acknowledge that. But America insists that until there is total discarding of the nuclear possibility, then only would sanction be removed. I mean, there is no recognition
Right.
of the sacrifice, the change, the radical change in policies made by North Korea.
So you think they have to have a much more phased, sequential way of dealing, like the Iranian nuclear deal, for instance, maybe
Yeah.
in that way. Now, this is interesting. When I was very young, I used to remember you were known as the kind of a strongman leader of Asia, right? That was, and you had a lot of back and forth with Western leaders. Now, you're portrayed in a very different way. I write about you in a very different way. I mean, in a way, you're the harbinger of democratization in Malaysia. Sunny Malaysia is a very exciting country. What do you see your role as someone who brings genuine, inclusive, pluralistic democracy to Malaysia right now? Do you want this to be your legacy, ultimate legacy?
Well, in the first place, this image of a very strong leader and all that is not quite true.
Right.
They just did not want to acknowledge that we were very particular about holding elections, about following the rules of law, simply because people do not like our reaction to them. As much as they can criticize us, we felt we have right to criticize them. And we tell them when they are wrong. And because of that, we became unpopular, and they branded us. Now they say, I've changed. I haven't changed. I'm still the same person. And when somebody does anything wrong, I will still criticize them. I think it is a right. You talk about free speech. You can criticize me, and I cannot criticize you. That's not free speech. So these are the people who advocate freedom and all that, but they deny our right to use that freedom to criticize them. So
It's abuse of their freedoms.
actually, there is no difference between my first term as Prime Minister and this my second term. I'm still the same person. If I find something wrong, I don't mince words. You see, I'll say what I feel I should say. And most people, and in the UN, for example, I was the only person who talks about Palestine.
Right.
You see,
True.
I have been advocating this since many years ago.
Yes, sir.
I haven't changed.
Prime Minister, going back to the Philippines, so we now finalized the Bangsamoro kind of transition process. You congratulated President Duterte on that. I believe it's a great thing. I got goosebumps when President Duterte said the word Allah Akbar multiple times during one of his election campaign. I never thought that will happen in a Catholic majority country like ours. So President Duterte actually shook up the system in a way that Trump maybe shook up the system when it comes to North Korea. Now, the reality is that us, Malaysia and Philippines, had some problems over Mindanao in the past, or at least that's the perception. But now many people are saying Malaysia has been playing a very constructive role. How do you envision Malaysia helping the process of transition in Bangsamoro? Because this is going to be tricky and expensive in many ways, right?
In the first place, we felt that violence and wars would not solve the problem of the South. The only way is to have negotiation or some kind of arbitration or even a court of law.
Right.
That's how we solve our problem with Indonesia, where we have claims over two islands.
Right.
We went to the court
And won.
and we
won, yeah.
But we lost in the case of Singapore.
Right.
So we have to be, if we talk about the rule of law, we must actually exhibit a willingness to accept decisions made according to the rule of law. But the damage done when you resort to that form of solution is minimal or none. But fighting a war is not something that will yield good results. Both sides are going to suffer. Lots of people will die, whole countries will be damaged, and in the end, what do you get? Nothing.
I'll push you a little bit on that because I remember you were here in Manila, I think 2 or 3 years ago, and you said something about investment sentiment and fighting crime in the best way possible. As you may know, we also have another war, the drug war. How do you think a country should fight the menace of drugs and crime? What is the best way to do it under the rubric of rule of law?
Yeah, drugs are produced in one place and transported to other places. although the modern chemicals that are being produced in laboratories can be produced anywhere. So we must be able to look after our borders well, and we must have cooperation in terms of information so that we will know who is doing what wrong thing, especially smuggling of drugs. This, I think, if we can control or limit the smuggling, we will solve half the problem.
So, Prime Minister, you think that we should deal with the supply side
Yes.
of the problem rather than just focusing on the consumption side, which some people tend to focus on too much, probably. What about the issue of Daesh or the Islamic State? Should we be worried about that very seriously here in Southeast Asia?
That is an extreme deviation from the teachings of Islam. Everything that they have done does not conform with the teachings of Islam. But unfortunately, a lot of people, because of their anger and frustration at being oppressed, they forget about what they should be done, what they should do as a Muslim, and they actually breach all the teachings of Islam because of their anger and frustration.
Should we be worried about the infiltration of much more ultra-conservative, some would use the word Wahhabi Salafist interpretation of Islam in this part of the world? Because we're very proud in Southeast Asia that our Islam is very moderate, very pluralistic, very open, but there are also some disturbing trends over the past decades or so.
Well, extremism is found in all religions, but perhaps it's more manifested now because people are more mobile, people can get more information very quickly, more easily influenced. So if this extreme conservative interpretation is confined to one country, it doesn't do any harm. But now we have ideas like that spreading all over. And the extremists too made use of modern communication in order to win over support. So our problem today is due really to the development of modern technology. Ease of travel, ease of communication, borders which are porous. These are the problems that have developed during our time.
So globalization of radicalism in that sense, right?
Yes.
Prime Minister, so what are the concrete things that Malaysia and the Philippines are doing to deal with these shared concerns over transnational extremism?
I think the best thing we can do, of course, is to start from the beginning. When teaching our religion, stick to the true teachings of the religion. Don't allow people who have some agenda of their own to breach to neglect the teachings of the religion, and in order to promote their cause, making use of religion for the wrong things.
Prime Minister, a lot of people look up to you as some sort of I term you as the last titan of Asia. I mean, you're one of the big guys from the 20th century, still around, thankfully. What is your advice to the younger folks? Because there's a lot of apathy towards politics. Many people are saying, why should I engage politics? It's the same people over and over again. There's no change. Why do you think young people, the millennials, should be involved in politics? And how should they be involved in politics in this age of social media and fake news and polarization? What is your advice, Prime Minister?
Now, with the spread of democracy, the young will have a role to play. And to play a role, you must be knowledgeable. You must know what is happening around you. If you don't, then the wrong things that are done will be perpetuated. If you want to have a better world, you have to work towards it. You can't say, well, let the world go to rot, it wouldn't affect me. It will affect you. So the young must show interest in politics, maybe not directly, but at least they must be very well educated and they make the right choices.
And Prime Minister, do you think that Islam and democracy are compatible, as the experience of Malaysia perhaps shows?
Totally compatible. You know, the Prophet never named a successor. His friends, his sahabat, determine who succeeds.
Although Shias would say different things, but let's not go there yet.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but the majority, the Sunnis are in the majority, they actually practice democracy right from the word go.
Right. And last question. I know you have fantastic rapport with President Duterte. He seems to be very fond of you. But as the elder statesman of the region, at least comparatively, what is your advice to President Duterte? He still has 3 years to go to lay down his legacy. What do you think should the president do moving forward? Friendly advice, perhaps. Not lecture him, but friendly advice.
Yeah. Well, any leader will do things which are sometimes popular, sometimes not popular. One of the things that he succeeded in is to bring about peace in Mindanao. That is a great achievement. Maybe you don't like the way he deals with drugs and and distributors of drugs, but that is up to you to give your views if you don't like. But that is his way, and we may not agree, but that is his way.
Did you give him a friendly advice when you were
No, I'm not here to advise him.
as friends? Thank you very much, Prime Minister Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad.
You're welcome.
Pleasure, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, guys. Looking forward to the next edition. Hopefully, we'll get other great leaders on our show. Thank you very much. Thank you again, Prime Minister.
Thank you.
Okay, we're good to go. Prime Minister, could we take a picture before you leave?